Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5:10. What if following God doesn't lead to applause but opposition? Jesus never promised comfort. He promised a kingdom for those bold enough to live for righteousness even when it cost them everything. You prayed, you stood firm, you did what was right and still, they misunderstood you, mocked you, excluded you, but you're not cursed. You're blessed. Because suffering for righteousness means you're walking where Jesus walked. In a world that rewards compromise and punishes conviction, this beatitude is not for the faint of heart. It's for those who choose to shine even when the darkness fights back. This final beatitude sounds different from the others. There's no comfort, no gentleness, no sweetness. There's pain, injustice, rejection, suffering, and yet Jesus calls it blessed. Why? Because persecution for righteousness' sake is not a sign of failure. It's a sign that your life is making heaven visible on earth. To be persecuted means to be opposed, criticized, attacked, or excluded not for being difficult or rude, but for standing on truth, living with integrity, and honoring God when it would be easier to blend in. This beatitude isn't for those who suffer for ego, politics, or preference. It's for those who suffer because they chose righteousness over reputation. And the reward? Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Not Will Bay's, not later now. This is the same reward given in the very first beatitude. Blessed are the poor in spirit. It forms a holy bookend, reminding us that the path to the kingdom is both humble and costly. In today's world, persecution doesn't always come through violence. It can come through being mocked for your beliefs, losing opportunities because of your convictions, feeling isolated because you won't compromise, being seen as too intense because you pursue holiness, facing criticism for speaking up when silence would be safer. But Jesus says, you are not forgotten. You are not losing. You are walking the same path he walked. He was misunderstood. He was betrayed. He was hated for healing, ridiculed for loving, crucified for telling the truth. So if you're facing rejection, not for arrogance, but for righteousness' sake heart, rejoice and be glad, for great is your reward in heaven. Matthew 5:12. Persecution is not the end of your calling. When you live fully for Christ, your light disrupts the darkness. And darkness doesn't like being exposed. But every act of righteousness, every decision to stand for what is true, even when it hurts, is recorded in heaven, remembered by God, and rewarded in eternity. This beatitude reminds us, the path of blessing is not always the path of ease, but it is always the path of glory. In the next part, we'll unpack what it truly means to be persecuted for righteousness' sake and how to respond with boldness, grace, and joy. But first, ask yourself, where am I tempted to compromise? Where have I stayed silent to be accepted? Where might God be calling me to stand firm even if it costs? Because this is not just a call to endure, it's a call to rejoice. Because when the world rejects you for standing with Christ, you're not losing status, you're stepping into your inheritance. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5:10. This beatitude is the most difficult and the most radical. It doesn't promise comfort, it doesn't promise popularity. It promises the kingdom through suffering. But to understand this beatitude, we must first ask, what does it mean to be persecuted for righteousness' sake? Righteousness is the cause, not personal offense. This beatitude isn't speaking about being mistreated for being arrogant, rude, or difficult. It's not about suffering because of personal flaws or poor decisions. It's about being rejected, attacked, or excluded because you choose to do what is right in the eyes of God. That might mean refusing to join in gossip, standing for truth in a culture of compromise, defending the weak, living with integrity when others cheat, speaking the gospel in love even when it's unpopular. Righteousness always attracts resistance. Why does righteousness bring persecution? Because light exposes darkness. Truth convicts lies. Humility confronts pride. Love disrupts hate. When you live according to God's standard, not the world's, you become a target. Jesus said in John 15:18, "If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first." Persecution is not a strange thing, it's a shared reality with Christ. Persecution comes in many forms. Not all persecution is violent. Sometimes it's subtle, emotional, social, relational. It might look like being mocked at school or work, losing friendships because of your convictions, being passed over for a promotion because of integrity, being misunderstood by family for your faith, having your motives questioned when you speak truth. Jesus wasn't only speaking to martyrs, he was speaking to anyone whose commitment to God causes them to lose comfort, status, or acceptance. This beatitude includes rejoicing. Shockingly, Jesus says, "Rejoice and be glad, for great is your reward in heaven." Matthew 5:12. How can we rejoice in suffering? Because suffering for righteousness aligns us with Christ, deepens our faith, strips away worldly attachments, brings eternal reward, strengthens the witness of the gospel. The apostles rejoiced when they were beaten for preaching Jesus because they were counted worthy to suffer for his name. Acts 5:41. The present tense promise, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. This beatitude doesn't say will be, it says is. That means the kingdom belongs to those who suffer now. God's presence is with them now. Their citizenship in heaven is not postponed, it's active. Persecution is not a detour. It's often evidence that you're on the right road. Persecution purifies. When you're persecuted for righteousness, it clarifies what matters. It reveals the depth of your convictions. It exposes shallow motives. It burns away spiritual apathy. It presses you into deeper dependence on God. In many ways, persecution is a refining fire that produces gold. We are not alone. Countless believers throughout history have walked this path. Prophets were killed. Apostles were imprisoned. Missionaries were martyred. Everyday Christians were rejected by families, betrayed by friends, and cast out of communities. And yet they endured with joy because they believed what Jesus said. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. We walk in their footsteps. We join a great cloud of witnesses. How should we respond to persecution? With love, not hate. Bless those who persecute you. Romans 12:14. With joy, not despair. Count it all joy when you face trials. James 1-2. With prayer, not retaliation. Father, forgive them. Luke 23:34. With faith, not fear. Do not fear those who kill the body. Matthew 10:28. Don't be surprised. Be prepared. If your faith is real, it will face resistance. The more you reflect Christ, the more the world will respond like it did to him. But don't lose heart. Persecution does not mean you're doing something wrong. It often means you're doing something right. This beatitude challenges us. Will you speak truth even if it costs approval? Will you walk in purity even if it costs relationships? Will you love boldly even if it leads to rejection? Because the kingdom belongs to those who say, I would rather suffer with Christ than succeed without him. Conclusion: persecution is not the loss of blessing, it is the proof of it. You may be overlooked on earth, but you are honored in heaven. You may be hated by some, but you are held by God. You may feel alone, but the King walks with you. So when the pressure comes, don't shrink back. Stand tall, stand firm, stand blessed. Because the kingdom of heaven, it already belongs to you. Persecution doesn't always look like prison cells or public trials. In everyday life, it can be quiet, subtle, and deeply personal. This final beatitude reminds us that following Jesus will, at times, cost us something. And often, that cost appears in the most ordinary places. Let's explore how persecution for righteousness' sake can show up in your daily walk and what faithfulness looks like in the middle of it. In your family, faith in the face of misunderstanding. For many believers, the first place they experience resistance is at home. Parents who mock your spiritual convictions, siblings who tease your purity or prayer life, a spouse who resents your growing faith, being excluded from family decisions because of your values. You may feel isolated, misunderstood, even resented, but Jesus sees it, he honors it, and he reminds you, you are not alone, yours is the kingdom. In friendships, choosing conviction over compromise. Standing for righteousness might mean losing friendships. When you choose truth over gossip, when you decline invitations that violate your convictions, when you lovingly call out sin and are rejected for it, true friends will grow with you. Others may fade. Don't fear the loss. God often removes what distracts so he can deepen what matters. At work or school, quiet pressure to conform. In professional and academic environments, faith can be seen as backward, irrelevant, or offensive. You may face mockery for biblical values, being passed over for promotion, pressure to lie, cheat, or compromise, isolation for refusing to engage in toxic culture. You don't need to preach at every moment, but living with quiet conviction speaks louder than words. On social media, the backlash of boldness. Posting your faith online can invite criticism, mockery, or unfollows. But peacemaking doesn't mean people-pleasing, and boldness isn't arrogance when it's rooted in truth and humility. If your digital witness reflects righteousness, don't be discouraged by opposition. You're planting seed saying some are watching silently, deeply moved. In the church, standing for what's right in broken systems. Sadly, even within Christian communities, standing for righteousness can bring resistance. Calling out spiritual abuse, advocating for justice when leadership prefers silence, choosing integrity over institutional loyalty. Jesus was persecuted not just by the world, but by the religious elite. Stay humble. Stay submitted to Christ. Let His Spirit lead you in truth and love. In dating and marriage, choosing purity in a world that doesn't. Living with purity, fidelity, and spiritual standards in relationships often invites mockery. Why wait for marriage? Why don't you just move in together? You're too serious about goat-its, just not fun. But choosing God's design over cultural norms honors Him and preserves your heart for something far more sacred. In personal battles, when obedience feels lonely, sometimes persecution isn't external, it's internal. The loneliness of saying no when everyone else says yes, the ache of obedience in the dark, the grief of being excluded because of your light. But take heart, faithfulness that no one sees is deeply celebrated in heaven. When you speak up for the voiceless, standing with the marginalized, the oppressed, and the forgotten often brings criticism. You may be labeled too political, too emotional, or too radical. But justice is not an agenda, it's a part of God's heart. And those who live for righteousness will always disrupt comfortable silence. When you refuse to stay silent about Jesus, sharing your faith even gently can lead to tension, an eye roll, a cold response, a changed atmosphere. But don't be ashamed. The gospel is still the power of God unto salvation, Romans 1:16. Speak it in love, stand in joy, and know that your boldness plants eternal seeds. When you suffer for doing good, sometimes you'll do the right thing and suffer anyway. You will forgive, but they won't respond. You'll speak the truth, but be silenced. You'll be faithful, but feel forgotten. In these moments, remember this beatitude. You are not cursed. You are blessed. What faithfulness looks like in daily persecution. Stay joyful. Stay gentle, not bitter, not defensive. Stay prayerful, not reactive. Stay honest, not afraid. Stay rooted in Christ, not in people's opinions. The more your heart belongs to heaven, the less earth can shake you. Conclusion. You don't need a courtroom or a headline to be a witness. You just need to remain faithful when it costs. When it's quiet, when it's lonely. Persecution may not be dramatic, but it is real. And so is the reward. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So today, wherever you feel the pressure, stand tall, stand true, stand blessed. Throughout history, the kingdom of heaven has often advanced through the blood of the faithful. The saints who endured persecution for righteousness' sake didn't seek suffering, but when it came, they embraced it with unwavering courage, love, and hope. These saints remind us that standing with Christ may cost everything, but it also reveals who truly owns the kingdom. Here are 4 saints who were persecuted not for fame, not for rebellion, but for righteousness. 1. Saint Stephen, the first martyr. Saint Stephen was one of the first deacons of the church, and a man full of faith, wisdom, and power. He preached boldly, performed miracles, and confronted the hypocrisy of the religious elite. His reward? He was dragged out of the city and stoned to death. But as the stones flew, Stephen looked up and said, "Behold, I see the heavens opened and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God." Acts 7:56. Even in death, he radiated peace. He prayed, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them." Stephen teaches us that true righteousness will provoke opposition but also open heaven. 2. Saint Maximilian Kolbe, martyr of charity. During World War II, Fromoir Maximilian Kolbe was imprisoned in Auschwitz for sheltering Jews. When a fellow prisoner was chosen to die, Kolbe stepped forward and said, "I am a Catholic priest. Let me take his place." In the starvation bunker, he led other prisoners in prayer and hymns. After 2 weeks, he was the only one left alive and was eventually killed by lethal injection. His persecutors tried to destroy his body, but his witness lives on forever. He didn't die in bitterness. He died in love, not for being a rebel, but for living the gospel without compromise. 3. Saint Oscar Romero, voice of the voiceless. As Archbishop of San Salvador, Saint Oscar Romero became a bold advocate for the poor and oppressed during a time of brutal dictatorship and injustice. He spoke truth to power from the pulpit, calling for peace and justice. He said, "Peace is not the product of terror or fear. Peace is not the silence of cemeteries. Peace is the generous, tranquil contribution of all to the good of all." One day, while celebrating Mass, he was assassinated at the altar. He died with the body of Christ in his hands. He was killed for speaking righteousness. He remains a voice for those the world tries to silence. 4. Blessed Miguel Pro, joyful witness under fire. In early 20th century Mexico, Catholicism was suppressed and priests were hunted. Fr. Miguel Pro ministered in secret, celebrating Mass, hearing confessions, and bringing the sacraments to the faithful at great personal risk. Eventually arrested and falsely accused, he was sentenced to death by firing squad. His last words? "Viva Cristo Rey, long live Christ the King." With arms outstretched like a cross, he died with a smile. His courage shook the nation. His joy under persecution remains a radiant testimony of hope. What these saints have in common? They lived for truth, not comfort. They loved deeply, even in danger. They endured rejection, but held on to joy. They forgave their enemies. They died with heaven in their eyes. They didn't suffer because they were political. They suffered because they reflected the righteousness of Christ. The world wasn't ready for it. What they teach us? 1. Persecution is not failure, it's fruit. Their lives bore witness that real faith will always be costly. 2. Courage is not the absence of fear, it's the presence of love. They were afraid, but love compelled them to stand. 3. Heaven honors what earth ignores. They weren't celebrated by their persecutors, but they are crowned in eternity. 4. You can be joyful even when you're rejected. Each one suffered with peace, not because the pain wasn't real, but because the reward your life can reflect theirs. You may never face a firing squad, but you can still live the same spirit. Be bold in truth. Be gentle in love. Be steady in rejection. Be forgiving when wronged. Be joyful when excluded. Persecution may look different in your context, but the courage, clarity, and crown are the same. Heaven is watching. When you endure misunderstanding for righteousness, when you stand firm for Christ, though it costs you, when you love in the face of ridicule, you are not forgotten. You are not losing. You are walking the same path as the saints, and the kingdom is already yours. Final word. The saints show us that persecution is not the end, it's the echo of heaven calling you home. Let their stories inspire you to live boldly, to speak truthfully, to suffer patiently, to rejoice deeply. Because when the world pushes back, heaven leans in and whispers, "Well done, child of the kingdom." What if rejection was a sign you're doing something right? What if exclusion, misunderstanding, and mockery weren't curses but confirmation? What if the pressure you're feeling isn't a wall blocking you, but a doorway God is opening? Jesus didn't say, "Blessed are those who are comfortable, accepted, or praised." He said, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake." This is the Beatitude no one wants yet, the one that defines whether the rest are real. Because mourning, mercy, purity, and peacemaking all sound beautiful until they cost you something, until the crowd turns, until you're alone, until your convictions collide with culture. That's when this Beatitude steps in not as a burden, but as a badge of honor. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Not might be, not someday, but is. Persecution for righteousness means you've chosen the harder path, narrow gate, the cross-shaped life. It means you've said yes to truth when it would have been easier to blend in. You've stood tall when silence felt safer. You've stayed kind when bitterness was offered. You've kept your light on when the world begged you to dim it. This kind of living is not accidental. It's intentional, and it's sacred. So what does Jesus invite us to do when persecution comes? 1. Rejoice not because of the pain, but because of the promise. This isn't a call to enjoy suffering. It's a call to lift your eyes. Because while rejection stings on earth, it's celebrated in heaven. Jesus says your reward is great, not small, not minimal, great. Heaven doesn't overlook what the world ignores. Every insult, every tear, every lonely moment, it's recorded, remembered, redeemed. 2. Recognize the company you keep. You're not alone. The prophets were persecuted. The apostles were in prison. Jesus was crucified. Your suffering places you in the line of saints and martyrs, those who change the world not by blending in, but by standing apart. You are walking in ancient footsteps. You're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. You belong to a kingdom that always looks upside down to the world but right side up to God. 3. Remain soft. Persecution can harden the heart if we let it. But Jesus didn't just endure suffering. He forgave through it. When you're excluded, respond with grace. When you're mocked, respond with kindness. When you're lied about, respond with truth and love. Don't let the fire outside ignite bitterness within. 4. Remember your assignment. You are not here to be liked, you're here to be light. You are not here to win arguments, you're here to reflect Christ. You are not here to be comfortable, you're here to be faithful. The moment we begin adjusting our convictions to preserve comfort, we trade the kingdom for a counterfeit crown. But when we stand, even trembling, we reveal what matters most, God Himself. 5. Reframe the pain. Every form of rejection can be turned into a place of revelation. God does some of His deepest work in seasons of isolation and loss. Don't waste the pain. Let it drive you closer to His heart. What if this season of persecution isn't punishment but preparation? What if the very thing you're being excluded for is the very thing God is going to multiply in power? 6. Rise with resilience. Persecution may bend you, but it doesn't break you. Not when your strength comes. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. Greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. So rise, not in anger, not in fear, but in quiet, courageous obedience. 7. Reflect before you react. Not every criticism is persecution. Sometimes we're being corrected and we need to listen. But when the pushback comes because of Christ, we must stand with humility and holy conviction. Don't react defensively. Reflect deeply. Is my posture like Christ? Is my tone full of grace? Am I being persecuted for righteousness or just for being harsh? Let your suffering be rooted in truth, not ego. 8. Rest in your inheritance. You don't need to fight for a place in this world when your name is written in heaven. Let that settle your soul. You are not forgotten. You are not failing. You are not falling behind. You are blessed, and the kingdom is already yours. So what now? If you're facing pressure, rejection, or pain because of your faith, don't retreat. Press in. Stay kind. Stay faithful. Stay rooted in love. Stay alert in prayer. Stay bold in grace. And if you've been hiding, afraid to speak, afraid to shine, this is your moment to step forward, not to impress, but to reflect, not to fight back, but to stand firm. The kingdom doesn't belong to the comfortable, it belongs to the courageous. And one day, when you cross the finish line, the applause you didn't get on earth will rise in heaven. The pain you carried in secret will be honored in glory. The battle you fought with tears will end in a crown. Because blessed are the persecuted, not forgotten, not weak, not defeated. Blessed, you made it. Through mourning and meekness, through hunger and mercy, through purity, peace, and now persecution. And if you felt stretched, challenged, even pierced along the way, then you've walked exactly where Jesus intended. Because the Beatitudes are not soft poetry. They are the blueprint of the kingdom. And the final Beatitude doesn't just invite you to live differently, it asks, are you willing to suffer for it? If so, then yours is the kingdom of heaven. You may be rejected now, but you are recognized in eternity. You may be overlooked here, but your faith is applauded in heaven. You may feel alone, but you walk in the company of saints. And through it all, you are not cursed. You are blessed. So carry this truth with you. When you're misunderstood, remember his reward. When you're mistreated, remember his example. When you're discouraged, remember his kingdom. You are not walking in vain. Every sacrifice has eternal significance. Every tear is seen. Every quiet act of faithfulness will one day echo in glory. And as we prepare for the next video or final step in this series, we'll bring it all together. What does it really mean to live the Beatitude life? How do we walk in the blessings of the kingdom day by day? What kind of people do we become when these 8 truths take root in our hearts? If this journey has stirred your heart, don't stop now. Subscribe to Holy Path Insights. Revisit the Beatitudes again and again, and join us for the conclusion of powerful invitation to live every day marked by heaven. Until then, stand strong, stand humble, stand blessed. Because when you are persecuted for righteousness, you are closer to the King than you've ever known.